right, so this is roughly going to be the format of today's session. So we'll have, just so you're all familiar with what was built on Azure, so we'll have each of our speakers come give a 10-minute overview for each of the projects, and then we'll have 40 minutes left over for Q&A. So with that, our speakers today, you met them. I'm going to hand it over to Adam from Trek to come over.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Adam Salvo, DevOps Manager at Trek Bikes. And as you saw in the video, Trek Bikes has been around since 1976. So for the past 30 years and more, we've been producing best-in-class products. So our bikes range from everything from kids' bikes to everyday town bikes to high-end carbon fiber racing machines, both on and off the road. So one of our little stories is that, basically born in a barn, raised on rocket science, race proven, loved the world over. Trek Bikes has a bike for everyone out there. So I work on the Ascend team at Trek Bikes, and the way we use Azure is not for just a specific application, but for a whole host of applications. So we see Azure really as a infinitely scalable enterprise class hosted data center. As I pointed out in the video, we were able to get started really quickly with just a credit card. Later, we moved all of our subscriptions over to our EA for simplified billing. So I kind of put up here a simple block diagram of how I've structured our usage of infrastructure as a service. And it should look familiar to a lot of people because at the end of the day, we're just using a bunch of Hyper-V VMs. It just so happens that Microsoft, we feel, does a better job of managing the infrastructure than we could in-house. So at the bottom, we are supporting infrastructure, Active Directory, certificate services, DNS, WASUS. We have some FTP servers out there as well. On top of that, we build our dev, stage, and production environments. These are primarily two-tier applications. So we have IaaS for our front-end web servers, SQL Server for the back-end. We're using pretty much all of the SQL components, database engine, analysis services, integration services, and reporting services. We also have a public-facing SharePoint site out there running for Ascend.com. We have some cross-cutting concerns, which I've put on both sides there. So for monitoring the whole thing, we have System Center's Operations Manager. And should point out that this is a completely isolated environment. We don't have, we're not doing like a hybrid cloud or anything. So all of our monitoring's up on Azure. Everything is on Azure. We have a few pieces of outside monitoring, just kind of monitoring the monitor to make sure that things are up, but the majority of the monitoring is contained within Azure Operations Manager. We use Remote Desktop Gateway to connect in. So I have this set up with a couple of load-balanced VMs to provide secure access to our infrastructure out there. Instead of having to open up endpoints for all of the individual VMs, this way we can just have port 443 open up on a couple of them. This is not remote desktop session hosting. This is mainly just a front end for the two-user allowance for administration on each VM. And finally, just pointing out our continuous integration and deployment that we have set out there. We're using TeamCity by JetBrains. So when a developer checks in code, we kick off a build, we run unit tests, and then we can push that out either to our web servers running on Azure via web deploy. We still have a few servers running a colo facility, and we can go direct to that. We can also push out to platform as a service using the PowerShell commandlets. So I think I went over most of the workload summary that we have running out there. So move on to some best practices. As I mentioned, these are just Hyper-V VMs, so don't be afraid to use your existing knowledge. Once you RDP in for the first time, if you've never before, you'll see the Windows desktop, and it's like, hey, I know this. So, I like to say, start with what you know, and then kind of go from there. Test, figure out what you need to change. Most of it's pretty easy. There's some interesting things you can learn about, the storage system, how to tune your disks, where to put SQL Server, and how to configure that out. If you're on premise and you had 30, 40, 50 VMs or even more, you're going to want to centralize your management. It's the same thing out on Windows Azure. So that's why we have an Active Directory domain out there. We're using group policy. I think Don might talk a little bit more about group policy as well. So the next thing is that you need to plan for transient faults. On infrastructure as a service, it's more of an awareness. On platform as a service, it's usually more of coding. So Azure is built on commodity hardware. The platform itself is designed to handle failures and does a really good job of recovering from those failures. But your VMs and applications may see maybe a couple of millisecond blip, or maybe 2 minutes while, if a server fails, your VM has to be brought up on another server. So one way to deal with that is to deploy multiple VMs into availability sets. This gives you additional SLA up to 99.95%, I believe. And so what you can put in there are your web servers. Like I said, we got remote desktop gateway, load balanced with availability sets. We also deploy our SQL servers to that. With SQL Server, you'll want to also use something like Always On in the enterprise SKU, or possibly mirroring in the standard SKU. And finally, once you get started, you're going to want to embrace PowerShell and the API to manage your VMs. So you can start with the portal, do your proof of concept, get stuff up and running really quickly. That's how I started. But then I quickly transitioned over to PowerShell. So I have lots of scripts that I use to stand up VMs. You can basically script out an entire deployment of of a SharePoint farm or whatever. They just recently enabled remote PowerShell by default. So once Azure's done provisioning your server, you can then use remote PowerShell to finish that provisioning process. So you're not supposed to read from slides, but Azure lets us spend less time managing servers and infrastructure, and more time developing features which provide value to our customers.
Why, thank you, Adam. That wasn't staged at all. People give us compliments all the time. We appreciate it. All right, cool. That's going on to Don Noonan from Blackbaud.
Thanks so much for coming. My name's Don Noonan. I'm an architect for Blackbaud. Blackbaud is a software and services company. We primarily, or actually exclusively, work on software and services for nonprofits. We have about 22,000 customers worldwide. We have products that were made in the early 90s, and we have newer products that we're working aggressively on. And so to Adam's point earlier, some of the things that we're working on fit right into Windows Azure when we have both platform as a service and infrastructure as a service offerings. We can basically deploy our classic products at the same time as work on migrating to PaaS. So if you can go to the next slide. So we have lots of projects going on with Windows Azure, but I wanted to talk just specifically about one of those classic applications. So there's a lot of buzz around infrastructure services, the ability to use persistent virtual machines, and I'm extremely passionate about that. We have a lot of classic software that is really our bread and butter for our company. In fact, it's probably 60 to 70% of my paycheck comes from income from those BB6, COM, those legacy apps where we have to deal with them. Traditionally, we've been doing that with colos, leasing big data centers, building racks of servers and blades, and doing all that infrastructure ourselves. And so part of the things that I work on are how do we get out of kind of the infrastructure business and leverage Windows Azure for those things. So this diagram is talking basically about how we deliver our new distance learning. And distance learning is just the buzzword for how do we train customers on our software and not do the traditional method of bringing them to our location, and when most of the time people want to do that over the internet. So Windows Azure helps us deliver training of our legacy applications by basically provisioning virtual machines on the fly and connecting to our what we call our instructor-led training database. So we have a third-party company that manages students signing up, looking through classes, searching for content that they're interested in, actually processing their credit card, and doing all kind of the scheduling. And so we've kind of tied into Windows Azure Management Interface to connect those two systems. So for example, if next week we had a class called General Ledger Essentials, which is one of our classes on our Financial Edge product, and 12 students sign up. Before Windows Azure, we actually had Citrix farms, and we had to plan for the 100% signups. So we had our own racks of servers just sitting there, whether idle or running at peak. And today, we basically talk to Cornerstone and say, who's actually signing up for these classes, and provision machines intelligently, so only spin up the compute resources for those particular classes. The other nice part about it is, with training, most of the time instructors have a set of metadata that's specific to their curriculum. And so, a lot of, I guess, custom content, whether it's on the desktop when the student connects to their machine, maybe they have some documents they want students to follow through, or literally different products that are installed. So with Windows Azure and storage, it's really nice to be able to have quite a few VHDs on hand and spin up those machines based on the particular class. So we may have 12 images stored up there, and based on what the particular class is, we can provision those VMs and pick accordingly. What else? The other part is we basically have what we call our remote desktop farm, our remote desktop services farm. And that was kind of a long project to get to the point where we could actually allow our students to remote desktop into Azure. And what's nice is, I think a couple months ago, RDS was allowed, which is it doesn't sound that big a deal, but with classic products or legacy apps, a lot of it is where you take a client and server tiers and you put them both in the data center, because a lot of things like ODBC connections, they don't survive WAN anomalies. So when somebody says, I want to take a classic application but deliver it over the internet, the instant thinking is Citrix or RDP or some type of thin protocol to run over the internet. So that was a big milestone that Microsoft came to the table and helped us get basically the ability to license RDS and Windows Azure infrastructure services. So Adam was mentioning group policy. So in this particular deployment, we have our own private forest. So we have a couple of domain controllers and an availability set, which you probably heard 100 times while you're at the conference. But there are a number of, well, actually there's 5 core group policies that I always talk about that you need to deploy when you have your basic infrastructure set up. So some of those things are things like keep alives. So if you are using remote desktop services, there's some load balancing technology in the Azure platform where you need some default settings that are set within your domain. Things about security, things about if you use the subnetting capabilities of Windows Azure, you can use group policy to apply Windows firewall rules by segregating your network. So if you have tiers, you may create a backend subnet for AD, you may have a middle tier or a database, and you may have a web front end. So group policy is a really convenient way, if you're deploying a private forest in Azure, or whether it's private or not, it's just a good thing to get in the business of, is group policy. Secure your cloud service. With remote desktop, there's been some sessions that talked about just robots out there that go out and look for RDP or trying to get into your VMs. So things like passwords. So in the portal now we have strong password management, but it's a big paradigm shift. With our internal IT folks talking about anything from malware protection to firewalls, there's kind of a learning curve for getting out of the management of all those devices and understanding that those are delivered through software or services with Azure. So it's just a good practice to work on isolating your workloads, understanding the services that are running in your VMs, and hardening your servers just from a basic port and password management perspective. And then Adam touched on this, just talking to the management interface, whether you're doing PowerShell or using .NET, it's always good. There's always going to be transient things on the internet, and so try again. We've seen that a number of times early in the platform stages, but we built all that code in, and now we're not having any issues actually deploying machines on the fly, even a couple hours before a class starts, because obviously we want to pay for compute while we're actually doing something with that compute, and so now we can reliably provision machines within minutes of a class beginning. So yeah, yeah. Anyway, this is basically that now we're able to have our customers. One of the taglines for Blackbaud is really that we want customers to focus less on technology and focus more on their mission. So whether they're whether it's March of Dimes or any type of customer that needs to work on philanthropy, fundraising, even management of museums. Our software covers quite a few areas in the nonprofit space, and so Azure is just another step in that direction of allowing them to kind of have this transparent. Don't worry about the data center. Azure will take care of that. So let's us pass that on to our customers.
Nice job, man. How do I know? It is on, I think.
Yeah, it is on.
Okay, so if you thought Trek Bikes was exciting, wait till we start talking about taxes. So, I got to say, not everybody rides a bike, but everybody every year does taxes. So, and the fact that you keep on coming back kind of makes me feel like you love it. I know. So my name is Timothy Corey. I'm an architect at Jackson Hewitt, and as you've probably already guessed, we do taxes, individual taxes. So, just to kind of talk about that, I know obviously you have to do taxes too, so everybody knows what this means. But just kind of thinking about the paradigm and setting the theme here a little bit so you understand why Azure is so important to us. You think about it, a lot of people come in January. That's when they get their W-2. They're ready. It's like when you can start doing your taxes. If you're going to get a return, you're very excited about that. So you take an hour off your lunch break. You go down. You go inside the Jackson Hewitt office. And you want to, get through this process, and you get it done. So a ton of people are just kind of flocking that very first week. So it's a major spike in traffic. That kind of makes sense. All the way throughout, from January to April, that's the tax season. And so we always have, obviously, a lot of traffic going through those months there. But first week that it opens up, huge spike. And then, of course, April 15th, we have the rest of you who hate taxes, and you have to pay, and so it's the last minute. And so you're kind of taking an hour off before the end of the day. So you think about that, we get another huge spike of traffic. So you think about especially that last day, April 15th, that's the cutoff, of course, for the IRS. They kind of want you to get your taxes done by then. So you come and you kind of spike our business with all of you, stampeding in. We also have to get that to the IRS in time. So we can't be late. Otherwise, it looks like you're late. So you think about the importance of availability, especially in those peak times. We don't just want to kind of achieve, we want to overachieve. We want to make sure it's, you're the customer, you come once a year, you're important. We have to get this done together. So it makes sense. You kind of understand the whole paradigm thing here. So just going to overview of the project, this big project in particular that we're working on, where we're using Azure a whole lot. Essentially, we wanted it for the scale-up model. That's plain and simple. So we have our own data centers on-prem. We handle our traffic. It works fine. We haven't had any issues yet, but we don't want to have issues. So the idea with Azure, the fact that we can scale up pretty easily, and they've got data centers, 4 in the U.S., so you're kind of all over the place. So we have geolocation. We have a lot of security that we can get from that, using Azure here. So this diagram is a little bit, it simplifies it, but it's basically what we're doing here. If you look at the box on the bottom right, that's it's a VNet in Azure. So, but you can call that a scale unit, or call it a rig, or call it a whatever container. That basically is our software. So we have on the left side of that, we have a couple of roles. ASP.NET Web App. That's MVC, and we've got some worker roles that does some processing. The red box there is SQL Server 2012 Enterprise Edition, which we chose for peer-to-peer replication. And as a quick point, that's actually why we're using IaaS. Almost everything in our app was able to be platform as a service, but we wanted SQL Server, full-blown SQL Server, so we decided to attach that as well. So that right there, that is our app. If you look on the planet Earth there, that's the on-prem data centers. We have our app scaled out a few times inside of our own hardware, or at least that's kind of the design. But beyond that, we also want to scale up to the cloud, so that's Azure in the top right, in case you didn't know what the cloud was. So there's other data centers that we use there, 2, 3, or 4, however many we want. However many makes it where we don't just feel somewhat comfortable, but we're way over our need for supporting the foot traffic as it comes in. So that's the whole idea. That's sort of the design there. We hook it up. We have our on-premise service that we use BizTalk. It's our ESB. It handles kind of the communication between all of those nodes. Because you think about scaling up, I should say scaling out. You're creating new instances. How do you keep track of them? So we use a centralized ESB that's also backed up so that a new instance shows up. It says, hey, I'm able to handle traffic. You can send some people over to me to get their taxes done, so to speak. And then, when it scales down as well, it can be deleted or it can be stopped now. You don't have to pay for it once you stop. The ESB just says, okay, I no longer need to send traffic to you. It makes sense. This is nothing complicated. The process took a while for us to kind of figure out how to do this, especially using some of the features of PaaS. We were so excited using the DLLs. We're like, look at all these great features we have. And then we kind of backed up a little bit, saying, all right, let's just build an ASP.NET web app and kind of utilize what we want, not necessarily just go crazy with every class that we can find in the DLL. So, anyway, that's a little bit of about that. Let's go on to the best practices. So, best practices. Sunny sent this slide on to us and said, give us 3. So that's what we had to do. There's a lot. I will say over the year and a half of working with Azure in particular, I thought, oh man, there's so many things. And I'm really glad that these guys here kind of touched on some of the big points that they have learned as well, which I feel like we did too at Jackson Hewitt. First of all, from the design aspect, you have to design for horizontal scale. That may sound really obvious, but typically when you're building an app, you kind of just build it to solve the business need. And you pretty much think, okay, I have my web farm. I've got some pretty powerful SQL servers on-prem. That's kind of the way you think usually. And so we don't code bits for, well, what if I need 10 more of these? We just kind of assume that we'll purchase the hardware and we'll have a big enough server. So first thing is, don't think like that. When you're designing a new application, think about, okay, what does the business need, but how can this one rig communicate with 10 other rigs? Or what if I needed 100 other rigs or scale units or whatever? So from the design, just kind of assume that that's the way you want to go. You want it to be able to scale out. Measure, design, repeat. So this second one was kind of like a little bit of a frustrating thing I had to learn at first, because I thought, all right, I was again thinking old school. I had my IaaS VM and I cranked it up to extra large, which was the biggest size back then. Now we have the A7, I guess, more RAM. Right. So, and my thought was, how much can I push through on this? I installed SQL Server on there, and I was just hitting it with, just writing to the disk and everything like that. And of course, eventually you hit a limit. So I hit the limit. And I was pretty excited. I was like, all right, that's how much I can insert. I want to go bigger. And I already started at extra large, so that was it. I couldn't scale any bigger. And I kind of panicked a little bit and realizing, okay, well, that's the whole point. This is good enough. It's got 8 cores, 14 gigs of RAM. That should be it. Now, create other rigs and scale. So anyway, so the whole point was you measure, you see what your throughput is, take it down a little bit so you're not necessarily always, maxing out every rig, and then go back to your design and say, okay, if this is my scale unit, how many do I need? As part of the design, you kind of repeat that process. The sub-point I have there, understand your eventual cap, your throughput per rig. That's what they call scale unit. So whatever that is, it could be that you're CPU bound. So that's, you have heavy compute, and that's as much as you want to push on that rig there. In our case, actually, we were pretty much I/O bound for the disk. So, okay, that was what we found out. Inserting into SQL Server, that's where we hit our limit. No problem. We'll just have more SQL servers and scale horizontally. Last one, undersize. Don't oversize your rig. With that whole measure and repeat kind of process, we figured out that a large VM for our SQL Server actually had the same throughput as an extra large, because like I said, we were disk bound. So paying for 4 extra cores and paying for the 7 gigs of extra RAM didn't help us in that need. So typically, again, when you're designing, you're cranking everything up, and then so the whole point there is figure out what you need, undersize. If you want to go under, actually, you can have more medium instances, for the same price as the large if you just kind of divide by 2 and you have twice as many instances out there. So you're paying the same thing, but now you have more instances out there. So if one goes bad, if one of your rigs goes down, you're not losing 50% of your horsepower. You're losing 5%. One of your rigs went down. Okay, that's not a big deal. And so that's the whole point. Is these all 3 kind of play together. Is you're thinking horizontal. You're not trying to make the biggest server in the world. You want to have a lot of servers that can handle the load, kind of spread it across. those are probably the biggest things I found. There's a lot of little tips and tricks that are published in terms of like if you're using SQL on IaaS, how to separate your temp DB and just different best practices. They're always kept up to date. So if you're running into an issue, I guess the last thing I'll say is not really a third slide. I'm going to add a little bit here. Sonny's getting nervous. I'd say if you're running into an issue, kind of with that whole secondary measure repeat kind of thing, there's probably somebody who's solved it over the last year or so. So I wouldn't get too panicky if you're trying to do something and like, oh, this is not what I expect. So I'd say reach out to Microsoft, and there's probably somebody who solved whatever issue. Look at that. She's moving me on. That's my timer. Okay. See, she didn't do that to them, but that's okay. I understand. I feel the love. So am I supposed to read this?
No. Add on to it, right?
Add on to it. I got to read it again now because it's been a while since I did say this, but then I forgot it was going to be in the slides. So, yeah, okay. Actually, that's a good point. So, like I said, this is sort of going back to the beginning here. We were going to be fully PaaS, platform as a service, and we just wanted that last piece there. So this is where IaaS came in. We were able to put SQL Server 2012, and it worked out. Completed the whole thing, and so far it's doing well. So, thank you. I'm going to put this down now.
Timothy. And I like how Timothy was pointing at me anytime you said IaaS, almost like I built the whole thing. All right, so we're moving on to the next step. We're actually doing great on time. I did want to call out one thing is that Don has to catch his flight pretty soon, so he'll have to leave out half an hour early. So if you have any questions for Don, we'll prioritize that first. And before we move on to our Q&A section, I wanted to show one more video. So you guys are like talking to real customers, but also movie stars. So we had one with Adam, and this one is with Don.
Blackbaud is the industry-leading provider for software and services that serve the not-for-profit community.
Kind of our core theme is to help them concentrate on their mission, but not have to pay attention to what's going on IT-wise.
All of our software solutions are things that can help them better communicate with their donors and prospects to raise more money.
Blackbaud has kind of a large educational services department. Traditionally, when somebody wanted to learn about one of our products, we would have those customers download the product from our website. Each time we'd have them kind of set up things on their own. We had calls of anything from troubleshooting typical PC problems to internet connectivity to how do I get a database set up for a program that I don't even understand.
And so we needed an easy way to provide them access to our software. One of the things that we were able to do was leverage Windows Azure and infrastructure as a service to provide access to a sample version of our software in 1 or 2 clicks. If we would have tried to do it using our internal resources, it would have cost a whole lot more money and taken a whole lot more time.
Training has changed tremendously here. With Windows Azure, we're able to spin up virtual machines, virtualized storage, custom tailor it to students based on when they actually take the class.
And we're able to do it at a moment's notice, something that never would have been possible if we would have used any other means.
Microsoft made some very good architectural decisions with infrastructure as a service and directly mapping cores. You're going to have the compute today and in the future.
It was really a dramatic win for my department and really more importantly my customers, because we were finally able to provide this access to our legacy solutions in a very quick, easy, efficient, and cost-effective way.
It's doing exactly what we hoped, which is provide kind of this seamless way for customers to get to their data without thinking about the back end.
And in the end, what that means is that our customers are able to focus on one of Blackbaud's key goals, the reason that we're here, which is to help them make the world a better place.
Right? All right, let's move on to Q&A. Anyone have any questions? Oh, great. Yes, please, and that way we get the question as well.
Okay, so this actually is a question for Dawn. On the last part of your slide, you mentioned be social, talk to your virtual machines. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So that quote might actually change over the next couple of weeks when we take advantage of what you guys just released, which is the ability to turn off machines and bring them back online, kind of the follow the sun idea where you don't pay for compute when you pause or stop your VMs. But at the time, actually since last July, we kind of went production a little bit early with distance learning. We had, yeah, a little bit early, about 50 machines running. And if you think about that, they're running 24/7, and they were still less expensive than doing it internally. But we felt more confident about just managing the content rather than deploying machines at the time of class. So those machines were sitting there and may not be talked to for weeks on end until our classrooms filled up. And just traditional OS type things like, maybe you try to hit a file share and put down a new database, and the first time you attempt it, maybe NetUse comes back and says no, or maybe it needs to be pinged a few times, something like that. So it's basically just saying, if you're leaving a machine around for a while and you're doing any kind of management things, number one, you should be using System Center or something that has an actual agent. But if you are doing remote type work, just try again. So that's what I meant by talk. Be social with your VMs.
Great, thanks.
I've got a question. I guess this is for Adam. You mentioned you were running System Center components up in there, and you also mentioned SQL, always on with the enterprise SKU, mirroring with the standard SKU. I was wondering if you could talk a little more about how you deployed your System Center components and what version of SQL you did, and any lessons learned or tips on architecting the SQL support for the System Center components.
Yeah, so right now we're just running Operations Manager, and we're trying to stick with the standard SKU for most of our stuff. So we're just using the basically just standard mirroring for our SQL boxes out there. We're running SQL Server 2012. And since it's a internal workload, we're just using the license mobility piece of our enterprise agreement. So instead of using the per hour billing, we're just basically installing SQL on a bare VM out there and using license mobility. So just trying to keep it as simple as possible, not trying to overcomplicate or add anything extra to the monitoring piece, because we want the monitoring to actually work most of the time.
Great. And I know these guys have said great things about our platforms, but please do feel free to ask some hard questions as well.
Full disclosure, I work at Microsoft. I work in the customer advisory team. My day job is to work with customers, help them and get advice from them as well. I work with some of you, have interacted over your phone. Timothy, I work even more closely. And you're, of course, heroes to us. You're, of course, heroes in your own, in your orgs, because you kind of flag bearers for this technology in your orgs. So question to each one of you is that when this technology first came up, what are the kind of challenges or pushbacks you got from your organizations within your people, real or perceived, and how did you overcome them? Thank you.
So for us, for challenges, I had the luxury of that my boss is high enough up that he was just pretty much able to say, go for it. He sent me an email from TechEd last year and said, I'd like to see analysis services running on Azure VMs by the time I get back. So we got a proof of concept rolled out for that. He's in the audience, actually. So we got our proof of concept set up, and I joke and say that we spent probably like $10 in compute costs to get that set up initially, and then tore it all down and went back and re-architected it, for permanent solution out there. As far as some of the challenges, we started in preview, so there were some bumps along the way. Ironically, I think the platform was like rock solid from like when I started in June up through February, and then they started pushing out some updates as they got ready for the GA rollout, and we had a few VMs that went down unexpectedly. But since GA, it's been rock solid once again, and been told to expect a little bit better experience this time, next time they roll out the platform updates. So it's great to see Microsoft learning from the mistakes. They're very, even though it was in preview and there was no SLA, they're still very apologetic for the the outages that they caused us, because some of us were running production workloads out there early with their blessing to get them the feedback that they need. So anytime we have had challenges, we've been able to reach out to our partners in Microsoft through various channels. I'm on a Yammer network, so I can get a blast out to quite a few number of people. And the person who runs that usually loops in a bunch of people from engineering, and we can get the issues resolved quickly. I've also gone out just on the general public forums, and I know that those are monitored pretty well now. And now that since they're in GA, if you have a support plan, you can go through standard Microsoft support and get help that way. So.
My boss is not in the audience, so I can say a lot. No. Mine is kind of boring. It's not on the technical side. Some of the lessons learned in dealing with adopting Azure was more about business continuity and PCI compliance and all kinds of fun roadmap items that are on PowerPoint decks way up there. And I'm kind of down here saying, this thing works, just do it. So one of those things, security. So we're, I don't know what you call it, Tier 1 payment gateway, which means we offer direct Visa and MasterCard processing for philanthropy reasons. And so most of our products are what they call within scope of PCI. So that's one of the things that we're excited that there's some roadmap there to get PCI compliance for VMs, because that's what's precluding us from moving the bulk of our, what I call our customer-based workloads, our production workloads. But that's kind of where we went with distance learning. So besides dev and test, which are a no-brainer, we kind of, as soon as I got pushback from our hosting, we started looking for other opportunities within Blackbaud, because there was plenty of other, even revenue-generating workloads. Training's a good example. A lot of people view corporate IT as a cost center, so whether it's delivering email, those kinds of things. We kind of went around and said, well, what are professional services doing? What kind of workloads can we get out of our own data centers and move up to Azure? So we were kind of in the same scenario where we went production a little bit early, had some blips. Our software is so, some of the software is not cluster aware, so when people preach the availability sets thing, kind of falls on deaf ears for some of us. So we're struggling with a single machine SLA. We'd like to see something where it says, a single VM on Azure Infrastructure Services has some guaranteed uptime, because I think the tagline is, if you have to write a line of code, then it's not IaaS. And so we don't want to write any code to try to make our old stuff cluster aware or multi-prong or whatever you want to call it. But we've worked around that, and that's where the teams come in and given us a lot of good knowledge about how we can work around that, how we can plan for things, and obviously it always comes down to monitoring, so we find out first before a customer tells us it's down. So.
And by the way, we have seats. I don't know why we have to stand up, but I'm not going to be the one of the three that's not standing, so I'll be up here. I think some of the issues with adoption in the company, too, for us is just the normal stuff. Anytime there's something new, there's kind of a little bit of fear, and it's like, well, what are you changing? Why are you changing this again? I even had a little bit of that apprehension. I was so excited about Azure. I was like, this is going to be great. But I remember just when we kind of sat down, we're like, let's deploy our first thing. I was like, well, what do we do? I remember just at that point drawing a blank, thinking, how do I do this? And I think Adam was kind of bringing it out. Once you RDP and you realize it's just Windows, you're like, oh, okay, all right. But with the dev side of the house, so some of the architects were excited about it, and then some of the devs were excited about it. But there's, we have a big team, and so there is definitely going to be that issue where somebody's thinking, why are you making me change my whole world? What are you doing this for? And so I think it was just taking enough time to help them appreciate that we're not trying to change everything. Not everything needs to be shoved on Azure. We're not just everything on the cloud now. And I think Microsoft's done a pretty good job about saying that too. That's not the goal. Find out what works well up in Azure, and find out what's going to make, as a developer, what makes your life easier. So just them kind of seeing the fact that you could put a lot of the pieces together and press F5, and there's your emulated environment, and it's like, oh, okay. So that actually makes it easier for a dev to not have to start up multiple services and try to connect them and then debug through. So there's little things. I'm just kind of using that as an example, but it was just taking enough time to show each individual in their responsibility why this might be able to help, why this might be able to work, and just kind of allaying those fears. That just took a little bit of time. I think the biggest group of people that are rightly apprehensive is probably the IT folks, because I kind of joke, they like to go and hug the servers, like they know where they are. So kind of saying, hey, what would be funny if you didn't know where your servers were? That's sort of like, kind of. But again, once they realize, again, you got System Center and you have all these different things where you can RDP in, you can see the server, you can monitor the health, and kind of once you get all that familiarity out, I think, the adoption just comes across. At least that's what I've seen in our business. So I'm going to go sit back down now.
Oh, thank you. I want to do a quick time check. It's 3:30, Don. I know. So a big round of applause for Don Noonan. Yeah. All right, next question.
Hi. Just to level set, I work for Microsoft, and very glad that you're Azure customers. But I wanted to understand, there's other cloud providers outside as well. So did you ever consider going to any of the other cloud providers? If not, why did you actually come to Azure? What were those things that you actually went through in making the decision to stick with Azure?
So I think I mentioned it in the video, and basically we had a greenfield project come up, and so we wanted to start with platform as a service on that. And as we were going along with that, we still had some back-end processing ETLs and analysis services, and that's not offered in platform as a service yet. So again, right around, that's one of the reasons why I got that email at TechEd last year. We were struggling with that. We were actually trying to pull the data over the internet to our colo, and it was, going to take 8 hours. And processing had to be done, about 7 hours before that. So, there's that platform as a service starting point as a Microsoft shop. No one else really had a Microsoft-based platform as a service offering. There's one other one that we were aware of that actually ran on top of, App Harbor running on top of Amazon and whatnot. But, Microsoft platform as a service at the time, it had been out for like 2-3 years, so it was pretty mature. It had SQL Azure as well, table, blob storage, so it had everything that we needed on the platform side, and then the infrastructure side came along to fulfill, all of our legacy needs, and that's pretty much sealed the deal for us. Now with some of the announcements at this keynote, no more being charged for stop VMs, per minute billing, which I think is the first amongst the major cloud providers, if not everybody. Just shows their continued commitment to the platform. I think it's kind of interesting to see a lot of the Azure stuff coming to on-premise now, and you hear about deduplication and storage tiers, and you're like, you know what, that's probably was developed for Azure, and now they're making it available for everybody else. I wonder what they're working on to make Azure even better now. So it's kind of nice that the Windows Server team working with the Windows Azure team to make a good product. It's not something that a lot of other companies are going to be able to do.
Yeah, and actually someone else, I gotta come back over here now. Someone else actually asked me a similar question. The way they phrase it, though, where were you? There you are. The way they phrase it was kind of in a negative sense. They said, what did this company do wrong so that you didn't choose them? And that's not really the way to think about it. In all honesty, it wasn't what any of the other companies did wrong. It's just kind of what we win by using Azure, and I should say kind of going with Microsoft. So one of the things I mentioned was the dev environment. You're in Visual Studio. It plugs right in. You set up here's my 2 web roles, my 3 worker roles. You press F5, it's emulated. You see it right there. That's pretty cool. Storage is emulated right there. So you're coding in an environment that's very familiar. And then what do? How do you get that in the cloud? You right-click and you say publish. So that was just a win. Beyond that, though, our first cloud system that we put up in production, we used Azure Tables, we used Azure Queues, we used Service Bus, we used blob storage, we used worker roles and web roles. So it's all that other stuff in the ecosystem that just lives there that we actually use, and we're like, hey, this is great. Okay, we can just use table storage. It was very fast. That was actually the first NoSQL, if you think of it that way, table storage I put into production. You've tested stuff, but it's like, oh, this just works right out of the box. And it was all there with the SDK. You download the SDK, like, hey, here it is, and again, emulated locally. So it's just the fact that you have all those other pieces that you don't have to go code yourself. So the other guys, they're doing a great job with what they do, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But we win a whole lot of other things that we didn't have to code ourselves by using Azure. And now if you look at it, actually even that whole left panel, where it has like the different icons. There's like a scroll bar there now. So I'm at the point where I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how many other things are in here that we don't have to solve? And so that's kind of cool. So those are the wins that, obviously you work at Microsoft, so keep doing that stuff, and it'll be pretty compelling. There's, why would you go somewhere else? Why would you go code it yourself? It just doesn't make sense. So that's my 2 cents.
Good answer. So just to incentivize people to ask questions, the next non-Microsoft person that asks a question gets a slap-on watch. You're going to ask a question and answer it.
Do I get a watch?
Yes.
I didn't notice in any of the slides calling out specifically a site-to-site VPN between your on-prem and the cloud. Did you guys do that? If not, why not?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, I think in mine it wasn't really very well called out, but we use, for our ESB, we have BizTalk that's on-prem, but we use the service bus, and that's the failover for site-to-site VPN. So, and the idea, we use service bus up front because that's what was there, and then eventually when the VPN stuff was coming out, we said, okay, actually that's what we'd rather use, but the service bus worked perfectly. So between the two, it was a WCF service as far as BizTalk was concerned. So now we have failover with that too. It was pretty cool.
I don't know if there is, but is there
Thank
one
you.
feature on your list, or more than one, that is not there yet that you would like to see in the Azure environment?
Yeah, for us, since we don't have the site-to-site VPN and we are just up there in Azure, one feature that we would like to see is a secure connection to another Azure data center, so we can set up failover.
Yeah, and by the way, now I realize, now that when I stand, I can see the rest of the people. That makes sense now. So it's the last time we'll talk about standing. I was like, oh, why can't I see anybody? Okay, I think for me, I think the one, I wouldn't say it's one feature, but everything that you can do in Azure that you like, it's a win, it's really easy, it's a checkbox. Like geolocation, you check a box and, oh my gosh, that's going to go across the planet and, well, across the U.S. in our case. But so anything that's like that, I got spoiled on. So when I ran into anything that wasn't like that, that's where I was just cursing, Corey Sanders, like, Corey, But in particular, if we have to give particular names. So I'll say, as a practical example, my current one, which I've already let these guys know about, is you can define your platform as a service right in Visual Studio. Two web, 3 work, or whatever. But for IaaS, you can't do that right in Visual Studio yet. That came after. So to me, that was just like, hey, why is this so easy? But I have to go to the portal or write a PowerShell script. That's really complaining. Like, it's almost like if you bought a loaf of bread and you're like, why isn't this sliced? It's a minor thing, but that's what I would like to see. That's probably the one that if that came out, I would, be like, hey, there's another win.
Cool.
You all have components that are also on platform as a service integrated with your infrastructure as a service. Are those two, do you have components on both that interact with each other?
Yeah, so we have some stuff running on platform as a service, and as far as the interaction goes, ours are mainly ETLs, which pull from SQL Azure into analysis services. So that's our main interaction right now.
Yeah, and for us, this project was kind of new, so we had the luxury of being able to code everything the way we wanted it. So for our product, it's mostly PaaS. We do go to IaaS for infrastructure as a service for SQL, and then anything that we need to do on-prem, we do have some existing services at Jackson Unit on-prem, so we just punch in through the enterprise service bus and then communicate to those services there. So to answer your question, no, we don't have anything personally that's like compute-wise on the IaaS stuff for us, for our workloads, other than SQL. But then everything else is just in IaaS. PaaS.
Thank you. I think I'm just giving watches to a couple of people. So but we can get this at the end.
Hi, I'm Joe Eckstein with A-Star Financial Services out of Minnesota. We're a premier agricultural lender. We have a lot of complex systems in our environment and a lot of servers, VMs. We're trying to build up a roadmap for looking at Azure and maybe other cloud services, but I was wondering if you guys did some road mapping of where did you want to go with cloud services in total versus just kind of picking away at it with a solution here or a solution there. Specifically, I noticed on your slides you have, for your scale, you had, when you need to scale out your tax services, you scale them out, and then when you scale them back in. What about a next step in your roadmap? Is it to, can you not take all of your stuff and put it out there? Or is there something deeper to the roadmap here? Why even, you've experimented with that now, that seems to work pretty good. Can you actually remove that stuff from your current infrastructure? So, roadmaps, are your roadmaps broader, bigger, brighter? And then also what that approach might be. So you have some good experimentation. Is there more to it now going forward?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, so I'll say the project that we were looking at was actually step 2 in our roadmap. It wasn't the first one. It wasn't really. We started off by kind of testing the waters with Azure and seeing how that worked. Personally, I wouldn't say that it makes any sense to just look at everything on-prem and say, how do we just throw all of this in Azure? You know, unless you don't want to manage your own infrastructure. But we have a lot of, like you said, complex systems and things in the back end too. So for us, it doesn't make sense just to put it in Azure for the sake of being in Azure, unless there was some huge value proposition to rewriting everything or porting everything. I don't see that making sense for us. What I will say is we do have a roadmap for just kind of our business in general, and this platform, this project that we're doing, we view it as a platform. We view it as something that we could extend out with future services, and that was the whole point of putting it not just in Azure, because Azure didn't solve that for us. We designed it to be pluggable and to grow, but Azure is kind of where we can scale up if we need to. As more services come online, you know, we can kind of tap into that and use it as well. So I would say I wouldn't think of it in terms of what's the roadmap to get everything off of our premises, unless, you know, that makes sense for you where you don't want to be in the management space of your own hardware. I would say more likely think, how can we put something up in Azure, in the cloud, so that we can start to utilize other, you know, business services that might help, you know, whatever you do for your, you know, your actual corporation, you know, whatever line of business you guys do. That would probably make more sense. I think an example of that is you've got BizTalk in the cloud now, BizTalk 2013, whatever it's called. So that's, now you've got an ESB out there where you can plug into. So that's starting to be this whole, you know, I'm going to have to look at that and kind of think, well, what could we be plugging into? I think I saw a demo where they had Salesforce, and, you know, that plugged right in and went to the ESB, went down to SQL, and I was like, wait a second, that was just so beautiful right there. Now I've got to go back to the drawing board and say, you know, and talk to obviously the rest of the guys and say, what do we do here? Can we use this? Do we want to use it? So that was cool. Yeah, exactly. I think the cloud in general, not just Azure, but I think cloud is kind of opening up this whole world that, you know, we're starting to look at, just like with mobile. You know, all of a sudden we're thinking, hey, everybody has a computer, like with them, we can do something new here. It's the same thing with the cloud. We're kind of starting to realize, what can we add to our business? So I guess that's the roadmap, is whatever. It's big.
So for us, I don't know if I'd call ourselves that we had a lot of complicated systems, but, you know, it's just a lot of stuff out there. I mean, the application's made up of lots of little services and that kind of stuff that have been evolving over the last 8 years, and a lot of intertwined code and stuff, but usually you can always find something to move up there in some way. What we found is, you know, some of the first stuff that we started moving up were, you know, all the stuff that was running on servers under people's desks. So a lot of our, like that whole continuous integration piece. Actually, we have a couple of our Team City ninjas in the audience with us right now. So, you know, that was one of the pieces that we moved up. So that's not customer facing, but it's still a production workload, because if that stuff goes down, our developers are, you know, going to go take a long lunch, I guess. So, you know, those are the little pieces that we got up there. I already mentioned how we started on some platform as a service. IaaS came out. Hey, let's move the ETLs and analysis services out there. And then, like, our long-term plan is to, we still have some production workloads in a colo. We want to get that on IaaS as well. just so everything's in one place, obviously. Simplified billing as well through our EA agreement. We're saving money. And then long term is kind of like to Tim's point of, the new services coming out with BizTalk and stuff. We're waiting for, looking forward to whenever they decide to put hosted analysis services. It's probably going to come. They've been doing reporting services already. Figure integration services and analysis services aren't far behind. So then we can start moving our IaaS stuff to platform as a service stuff. And then what that enables us to do is instead of hiring more infrastructure people or, my title's DevOps, so more DevOps people, we can hire more developers, code features for our customers as opposed to managing services ourselves.
Non-Microsoft
Those videos were great. This question's for Timothy. Why aren't you in one of the videos?
I'm kind of hoping to be invited to Tuesdays with Corey. It's a great show if you've seen it. No, obviously this is a very silly question. It really has. Now we're kind of wasting. Corey's wasting people's time with this. But anyway, yeah. No, there was a video. It had me in it, so they cut it. So that's the answer. That's the answer.
No, the video was a Q&A with Tim, so it kind of.
Yeah, I figured I could answer a question. You would have to. Let's watch the question someone else asked.
Thanks. I got a second question here. This is either for Adam or Tim, and this concerns Azure Financials and your monthly bills. And I'd be interested to know how you guys sort of became comfortable with the billing, and were there surprises or shocks? Did you do anything special to kind of anticipate the billing and detect, unexpected spikes before the bill came, stuff like that?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So I receive a copy of the bill every month. We are also in an enterprise agreement with Microsoft just because the size, and if you're going to have enough stuff, then you kind of simplify the way you do all your billing and things like that. No, there's been no shocks, no surprises, except for Monday when I kind of figured out, and it's actually a good surprise, when Scott Guthrie said that all the dev test stuff is going to drop to 6 cents an hour. So that was huge. So it's been very consistent. You go to the calculator, you kind of figure out what you want to do, and it's actually, I think, better than if you have your own on-prem stuff, because if you want to do on-prem pricing, you kind of have to guesstimate the electricity bill and the space and all sorts of stuff. You kind of put it together and you say, I think this much compute can be this price. But with Azure, you literally, you pay, for what you use. And now with the per minute billing, I attribute, by the way, all features to you. That's why I do this when I talk to Sunny. It's the closest Microsoft person. So, Sunny has achieved for us. No, seriously, with the per minute billing, being able to stop the VM and not pay for it anymore, and the price drop for dev tests, I was absolutely floored by that, because it was already okay. It was already achieving what we needed. And there's been probably 2 or 3 price drops. I get an email every few months. Everybody does, obviously, saying like, "Hey, by the way, we've dropped the price." And that's been the weirdest thing to me. Is I'm like, well, what's the catch? But just that they're just doing a better job at it. It is kind of a little scary. But yeah, so the price has gone down a whole lot. That was it.
Quick question on that, sorry. And the SQL Server Enterprise licensing, now that being on an hourly basis, how has it impacted your adoption for the solution that you built, and why it is so better for your deployment compared to what it was before that?
Sure, yeah. Did you want to talk to the other thing first, or do you guys anything with the pricing?
Yeah, I can just do. So we started out as pay as you go, and when we started actually ramping up, the first time we were going to run a ton of Azure databases and stuff. A little worried that first month when we got that first bill, but there were no surprises. At least with SQL Azure, they have a lot of DMVs built in that you can query and kind of see your usage, and that's basically what they do their billing off of. And then when moving to the enterprise agreement, it's even easier now. I can get an email that basically says how much money I have left on my upfront commitment cost for the enterprise agreement. So I can kind of see it's burning down, X dollars every day. And if I see a big jump, then I can go look. There hasn't been any big scary jumps, and I can also pull reporting down every day as well if I need to. But there hasn't been a need to, so I just wait till the end of the month.
Yeah, and so to Sanjay's question, which, by the way, you should probably say, like, oh, I'm in the SQL team or whatever when you're asking the SQL question, so people know why. Yeah, that was a big deal, though. That was actually kind of huge. I don't know, does anybody else use Enterprise Edition of SQL Server on-prem? Nobody? Just one, two? Okay, so yeah, a few people, obviously. Yeah. So that was a big deal for us. For Azure, you can provision SQL Server IaaS, and you can have standard, and then we wanted enterprise anyway, so just kind of cut to the chase here. That was almost not going to be in the per hour billing. It was going to be where you had to buy a license, and that just didn't make sense for us. Again, you think about Jackson, you think about taxes, January to April, so 4 months that I need to use all these SQL servers. I didn't want to buy the license for the. Nobody wants to buy. It's not me. It's not my credit card, but nobody wants to buy the license for the whole year. So they really came through with that. Right. Again, it's the whole cloud first commitment kind of thing, showing that you pay for what you use or what you need, and so that was major. I mean, it literally would have been millions of dollars worth of licenses for our particular use case. That would have ended the project right there. It wouldn't have made any sense. So they really came through, and it was a huge win.
Great.
Yes. So if I understand correctly, both of you are publishing servers directly to the internet from the VMs, right? Like port 443 and so on. Are there any that you're aware of, any protection in Azure in itself for like denial of service attacks and so on? Because I guess you won't have any perimeter network or firewalls or such features in there, right? So how do you think about such security things?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. Yeah, so there are. Do you do something?
Oh, I saw people. So I know Gautam is leaving. I just wanted to do a really quick shout out to the engineering team. A lot of features that we're talking about are sitting right there. I don't know. It's very embarrassing. All right, sorry.
Are they going to come on stage?
No. So
I think they should. Okay, so yeah. So he was trying to leave in private and kind of called him out. Is that how that worked? Okay. Where were you? There you are. So there actually is a lot of firewall and security features of Azure. So we don't expose all of our VMs to the internet. The only one that's actually exposed is our web layer, which we intend. It's you browse to that. The other ones are behind the firewall. They don't have a public endpoint. And then internally they communicate, of course. And that's the whole VNet concept. So if you haven't really listened to a whole lot, there you go. And then also the VNet is connected to our on-prem VPN. So again, even that communication for SQL replication is just through there. So there is a lot that you can do. And now there's even more, which I'm not as familiar with, but there's even more you can do with like, ACLs and things like that, saying you can come from this IP address and I'll allow this traffic and things. So there is a tremendous amount there. And actually, I know that Microsoft, that's all them. They're handling that. The load balancer is there. So if you try to DOS attack, they're going to find out who you are and stop you somehow. I don't know. It's dangerous. But we don't have to code any of that. You get all that free. So that's it.
Any more questions? We probably have time for one more. Yeah.
There was a question about mixing PaaS components and IaaS components. Just to add on to that is that, yes, you can have PaaS components connect to SQL Server running on IaaS. We have a tutorial up there, how you do it, what kind of things you need to write in your connection string, so that from PaaS roles you can connect to SQL Server running on IaaS. It works just fine.
Yeah, one thing I didn't mention is that you can deploy your PaaS components into the same virtual network now as your VMs, so you don't even have to go over the public-facing port or over through the load balancer. So you can get it right in the same VNet. So it's just like if you had a DMZ connection to a database connection on premise. So keeps it more secure.
Okay. One last question. I think there's still a watch left. Yes. Okay, fine. Tim gets the watch. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy Tech Ed. There's been a lot of videos about the features that we have released. If you have any questions, you can watch those. And hope to see you next year.